Ryan Brown.
Hello, Tansley Stearns.
We are back for more fun.
Heck yeah.
I have a memory of one of my early times engaging with you, which was around innovation. You were in an innovation session that I was leading, and you were one of the most curious people I have ever met.
Wow, that's a huge compliment. Thank you.
Tough questions too. I remember a couple of them. I was like, I don't know that I know the answer to that, but I bet we can find out.
I remember the session well. I remember that day very well.
So great. All right. So you're a young professional, Ryan, and you right out of college, full of ideas. You've started in your job and you're ready to tell this organization, here's 50 ways they can fix their stuff.
Love it. Take a
Great.
deep breath and learn about the why. I had this conversation with somebody recently, actually, who's brilliant and asks amazing questions. And I hope that we've empowered them to ask those kinds of questions without consequence, basically, like within reason. But yeah, be curious, don't be afraid to ask any questions kind of thing. And I hope that we have a culture like that. I'm certain that the folks that work for you feel comfortable with that and can ask those types of, why don't we do this types of questions, or why are things kind of done this way? My advice would be to really spend that time. I've talked about this before, but my first couple months here at this organization was simply interviewing people from across the organization and learning and understanding more about their backgrounds and why things are the way they are. I think you have to do that before making suggestions for change.
Mhm.
But that can be done in tandem with that. It can be done fairly quickly. Um, Again, with it depends, it depends on kind of the topic, but a big one that, having been through a lot of different innovation labs, that comes up always is some type of new technology that's going to be a wizard that's going to fix it all. Um, and I would imagine that most credit unions are in a place where they have a lot of different technology platforms, and there's a lot of legacy involved in that. There's a lot of expense, there's a lot of tech debt, there's just a lot. And understanding those different systems and the why behind them, I think is really important, knowing that, you know, most industries, we're obviously in credit unions and they're heavily regulated. It's not easy to just go in and implement something. It's not easy, or we've got adversaries in the cyber realm that make it very challenging to, for example, have a one-stop shop for data. That's a very scary thing for a cybersecurity person. And while that might be really helpful to be able to deep dive into member data, that would be a barrier that you'd want to understand kind of going into that. Well, why don't we have a CRM? Well, I mean, that's a huge conversation, but spend the time to understand like why it is your organization is where they are. But don't stop with the questions and the healthy skepticism would be my advice.
I like it. One of the things that I think can be a path for a young professional to really help an organization is to gather insights as a driver to that conversation. I think one of the things that can be hard for credit unions is to see beyond our subject matter expertise, even to see through the lens of the member. We have a lot of empathy, and we're so closely connected to the work that it can be hard to see it
Absolutely.
through an objective lens. And I think a superpower for a young professional could be bringing insights
Absolutely.
instead of bringing solutions.
Yeah, we recently hosted, I think it was the third year in a row, where we partnered with DU to sponsor a case study. And we bring in the top teams from that case study. And this year's case study, big surprise, was around AI and why not? And one of the things that I heard that stuck out was this individual was basically like, now obviously we want to understand um, young professionals or newer members because, like any business, we want to continue to build that pipeline and those relationships. And they said, the companies that I interact with that don't have AI worry me. It feels like I'm suspicious that they're not far enough along that that they're not providing me with that personalized experience. I expect that. And if they don't have that, it's really off-putting to me as a person. Because somebody asked the bold question, like, where do you do your banking and why aren't you with a credit union? And so each person from these different teams was answering, and this is that person's response was, when I look at a financial institution, if they don't have AI now, then I'm less likely to bring, then they're like, well, I'm broke, but eventually I won't be because they're a college student. But I thought that was so interesting. And so I think if you're an emerging professional, you're new, your insights are exactly what we need. Exactly
And
what we
maybe even being an insight gatherer, not only your insights, being the person that asks questions of
need. Yeah.
members, that asks questions of the team. I think it's a really unusual thing. I've seen some people do it, and I think it could be a really cool way for somebody that's newer to the organization to stand out. I would love to have somebody sharing insights that were coming from our members. And I'll just say, as someone who taught innovation for a long time, we're not asking people the solution they want. We're asking about the problems they face.
Yeah.
Nobody knew we needed this thing connected to our hip. I couldn't
Yes.
have said that. But we knew the problems we had.
Yeah, I often think about you know, or when we go through these innovation things, and you mentioned the time where you came as a consultant and then you ended up helping to lead what is now at Canvas a really amazing program, our innovation lab program. And what I've seen time and time again is the most successful teams are the ones that did a really good job listening and understanding. And while there have been some amazing examples of the big bold, oftentimes they're not. And there are things that are um, maybe on the surface seemed a little boring. And then you start to dig in and you're like, wow, that's actually really smart. You're looking at something that's maybe just the combination. I mentioned software systems earlier, and that was one. It's like, well, we have these existing systems. We could make a couple changes according to and they would bring those insights up of, hey, we met with, this VP of IT or whatever, and they said that this was a possibility here, but they haven't tried it yet. And so we think it'd be really interesting for you to try that iteration. And hey, it didn't cost a whole lot of money. Those have been the ones where we're like, yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think also just the opportunity to engage. The other thing that I would say to be true for a young professional is that they would add so much to an innovation group. So if the organization has something they're doing around innovation, being someone who's regularly asking to participate, that new, fresh perspective will be really helpful to the group, I would imagine. And even if you
Agreed.
don't get a shot initially, even just raising your hand is a big deal.
I am a huge fan of the hand raising no matter what. There's way
Mhm.
more to gain from that. And yes, there'll be, your stodgy leaders that might roll their eyes or whatever, but it's worth any kind of pushback that you would get to always be kind of pushing forward and asking those questions and
Yes.
raising your hand. I mean, like, I can't imagine a great organization condoning someone challenging the status quo. I
Mm.
just, we can't afford to do that as credit unions.
Yes, agreed.
What are
And
the,
maybe there's also a role for being a tester. That's one of the things we love to have a lot of around here. So we do
Mhm.
build new things, and it's very helpful for us to have people that are willing to test and try what we're building and trying and give us feedback. That's another great way to get involved early.
And don't be afraid to share that feedback. I had a situation, it was like a year or two ago when we were launching our digital, and I noticed something, and I was like, surely they've noticed that. And I came into work the next day. I went, you know what? I'm going to walk down and have a conversation. And the person who was working on this project was like, oh, I didn't know that was happening. So like, I think don't be afraid of, if nothing else, you've noticed something that was already kind of going on. But in this case, I was like, oh, dang, like, this was a thing that they needed to make a change to. So
Yeah.
and
What
people
about
afraid.
favorite learning on this? Do you have a book about innovation that you would suggest to people that are interested in this topic?
Hmm, my team would kill me because I know we've had books that we put out or that we've suggested.
Well, we could put it in the notes if you come up with one.
What about you?
I always go back to Clayton Christensen and Innovator's Dilemma. I think that's
Hmm,
a really good one on the fundamentals. And I would say this, less than a title, more of a suggestion about brain food. We often read about things that are very close to our subject matter expertise. So if you're a marketing professional, you might be reading about marketing. If you're a human potential professional, you might be reading about human potential. If you're an accounting professional, you're reading about accounting. It might be really helpful to read about things that have nothing to do with your subject matter expertise, and even better, nothing to do with financial services.
please. Yes, do that.
Yeah,
Step
I like.
outside. And remember, that's a big part of the value that, I was joking with one of our newer hires. I was like, we have like 3 to 6 months before we corrupt you with all the things here, because they were from a different industry. And it's like, tell us all the, what's life like out there, you know?
I just said this. We had a new team member start, and I was talking with this person, and I said, in 6 months, you're going to be real close to what we do. Now you see things and you may have many questions. Bring them on.
Yes. Yeah, we've
Bring them.
actually onboarded a couple really important new role. I mean, everybody's important, but a couple strategic roles here and on my team and beyond. And the questions that they're asking are great, fresh perspective.
Love that. One more piece of advice I would give is our industry does have a think tank, and
I
I
was
think
just gonna ask about that.
yeah, it's a great program. And I would encourage if you go to Filene's website, which is filen.org, FILENE.org, all of the alums of I3 are in there. Pick five, connect with them on LinkedIn, and ask them what their advice about innovation might be.
I love that. They will be flattered.
And
People
you'll
are
learn
flattered.
so much.
Absolutely.
So much.
I was going to recommend the I3. Hopefully, you're an organization that supports Feline and have that ability to do that. But there's a lot of programs like that. And the other advice I would say is a lot of universities offer certificates instead of a full
Mhm.
board degree. And certainly the ones where we have partnerships. And if you've got a tuition reimbursement thing going on, hopefully. And if not, they're still reasonable. And it's typically a semester or two. And I think that's a skill that you can take I know it's a skill that you can take into other, like for the rest of your career. Super important.
Agree. Stay curious, friends. It's
Always,
important.
always.
Okay. That's the word on innovation today.
Hope it was valuable.
High five, friend.